G'day, this is the Sherwood Aluminium mounting plate for a router table. It means you can place your router, mount it on this plate, put it inside your table. Now, depending which router you have, you can actually buy mounting plates that are pre-drilled for your router, but not every router has the same base pattern, and sometimes you need to manually drill the holes in these aluminium plates to make it fit your router. That seems like a daunting task, but it's not. I would prefer to do this with a drill press, but you can also do it with just a handheld drill. It's just about figuring out exactly where to sit the router and then where to drill those holes. And I'll walk you through that process. In this particular kit, you get this solid aluminium base plate. It has a couple of these plastic inserts that come with it. Most importantly with this is this little aluminium centerpiece which allows you to center your router before you mount it. A really handy little piece of kit there. You'll also get a bunch of Allen keys in this kit, the centering pin which allows you to center your router, and a few other bits and pieces to allow you to mount this properly into a router table. So the first thing you're going to need to do is get your router and figure out where those holes are and how to get those holes marked on your plate so that you can drill it. Now, we're using this AEG router. The process for other routers might be a little bit different, but fundamentally it'll be very, very similar. The key part of this that makes this process easier is all routers generally come with this plastic base plate. Now, it might not be shiny and clear, often they're black, but they will be mounted into the base of your router with a couple of screws. We're going to use those same hole locations to drill holes in our aluminium plate. So in a lot of ways, we use this piece of plastic as the template. If you have an old router that doesn't have a base plate anymore because you've lost it, you can put a piece of paper on here, trace the location of those holes and transfer them to the aluminium plate. But I'm going to show you the way to do it using this plastic base plate. First thing you're going to do is get this steel pin, mount it inside your router collet. It doesn't need to be crazy tight, but as long as it's in there nice and firmly. This centers your router in that plate. You need to then mount the router back into the body. In most cases, the body and the router are attached to one another, but the AEG comes apart. Okay. Once the router is mounted back into the body, in the case of this AEG, we're going to place this steel pin through this aluminium hole, and then we're going to trace around the base of this plastic insert so that we know where to drill those holes. Now, we're going to do this process with the base plate upside down, so the router is sitting as it will be when it's mounted in to a table. Place that in there like that. When this is mounted in your router table, it'll be sitting like this. What we're going to be doing right now is with the whole thing upside down. It's worth noting where the front of this mounting plate will be. So on this particular plate, it says Sherwood at the front. You need to keep in mind that you're going to access this router from under the table to raise and lower the bit to turn the router on and off, depending on the table that you have. And so you want those features facing towards the front, in this case, where that writing is. So I'm going to also put this plate with that writing facing towards me, so I remember to put the adjustments that I need facing forward. I'm just going to place a little F on the underside of this base plate so I know where the front is at all times, because it's not marked on here. I'm using one of these little white pica markers that work on basically anything. Now that the router is sitting in the base plate, we need to turn it so that it's in the orientation that suits me best. Now I'm going to actually offset these handles diagonally because that often makes it easier to place the router down into the table when you go to install it. This also gives me really good access to the power switch, which is just here, and this height adjustment, which is facing towards me here. You'll notice that I have this sitting in a vise so that that locator pin can actually come through what would be my workbench otherwise it will get in the way. So you can just prop this up on some pieces of timber or whatever you need to do so that that location pin is free. Okay, I'm happy with where this is sitting. I'm then going to do two things. I'm going to trace around this plastic base. After I've traced around the plastic base, I'm going to mark a little line on the plastic base and a little line that matches on the aluminium base plate, so that when I take the plastic base off the router, I can put it back in exactly the same place. Now that we have that marked, we can remove our router. We can also remove the base plate, because we're going to use that base plate to mark the location of the holes. Now, you need to make sure that you're placing the base plate upside down on the aluminium mounting plate so that it matches the orientation that it was before. And then line up that little line that you've drawn on your base plate, which is just there, with the location line you've drawn on your mounting plate. When you're confident that that is in exactly the right place, you can then use a marker or a punch or pencil to put the location of those holes for the screws. This router also has the ability to put a rod through the top of the mounting plate, down through the table to adjust the height. And it's got a hole location for that, so I'm going to mark that as well in case I want to drill that in the future. A lot of routers that are designed to be used as plunge routers as well as table routers have this functionality. They'll have some way of doing height adjustment through the tabletop. Now, you can drill the hole in this aluminium base plate to allow you to do that. All my holes are marked, their location looks good. I can remove this and put it aside, and you can see how neatly this picker has drawn on that aluminium base plate. We're going to use that to drill the holes next. We're going to drill these holes in 3 steps. Depending on the screws you use, you're going to need to drill a hole for the actual body of the little bolt. In that case, these a 5mm hole or a little bit larger than a 5mm hole will fit the body of these bolts really well. Now you're also going to need to countersink the head. That could be with a countersink bit if your bolt is a countersunk bolt. These ones are not, they have a pan head. So I need to drill a hole for the shank of the bolt thread, and also I need to drill a little countersunk hole, a divot, for the top, which means I'm going to be drilling 3 holes. The first is a pilot hole. It's going to be using a really fine drill bit, about 2mm, to drill through those little white dots that I've drawn. Then, those pilot holes will then allow me to see the location on the top side. I'm going to drill using my 10mm drill bit, a hole deep enough to hide that head flush in the top, and then I'm going to come through the bottom and drill a hole large enough for the screw itself. And I'll show you that process now. Once you've marked out the location of those holes, we're going to drill those holes. Now, I've gone and done it on the drill press. You'll see that footage. I'm going to talk you through what I did. First thing I did was get a 3mm drill bit or 2, or a nice small drill bit, and drill a pilot hole straight through the center of where your white dot is through to the other side. This means that you can see where that hole location should be on both sides of the plate. Second thing that I would recommend doing is get the largest drill bit that you're going to use, which is to fit the head of the screw or the bolt. In my case, that's a 10mm drill bit. Now, most of these router plates are mounted using countersunk screws or countersunk bolts. These ones are not, they're a pan head. It doesn't really matter, you've just got to make sure that that head sits below the surface level of this router plate, or you're going to hit it every time you run a piece of timber across it. So, this larger drill bit is used to create a countersink. If you just have a truly countersunk bolt, not a pan head like I do, you can use a countersink bit to do a true countersink instead of a little rebate that head sits in. It's really important to use a depth stop here on your drill press. If you don't have a drill press and you're doing it by hand, put a little texture line on the drill bit how deep you want it to go, because you do not want to blow through the top plate here, otherwise your screw it doesn't have anything to attach itself to. Then I'll go back to the back side, or it doesn't really actually matter which side you drill it from for this last part, and drill the hole that the threaded part of the screw or the bolt will go into. So in my case, that's about a 5mm drill bit. Your screws will be different. The shank size will be different, the head size will be different, the depth that you need to go will be different, but the basic process will be the same. This will get you a nice clean hole with a nice clean countersink or rebate. Now, you can just touch that up with a tiny bit of sandpaper if it needs it. These are actually really nice and smooth. So my screws sit in there really neatly. They sit about 2mm below the surface, and they protrude by about 6mm on the bottom. That'll be enough for this. You could actually seat these a little deeper. You could get some slightly longer screws if you wanted to make sure that it was really going into the meat of the motor body, but that 6mm should be enough spread across 3 screws. A couple of things to keep in mind. When you're marking the location of your where your holes are going to be, make sure it's not near an existing hole like mine was. Now this is fine, there's about 6mm of gap there, but really I could have turned this by a couple of degrees and it would have been further away from that hole. That hole, not entirely sure why it is there, those 2 threaded inserts. I think it's for some sort of flattening device, like these other threaded inserts which are used to stabilize and position this router base and make sure it's level. Not sure what those 2 are for, but I was pretty close to it. I should have done better, and you can do better too. Just don't put your holes right next to another hole. Like I said, I'm not going to drill out that hole yet. That's if I want to run a rod through the top of this plate. Some routers allow you to raise and lower the router through the top using a rod. So I have that marked in case I want to do it in the future. Now I can screw this on. I'm going to line up my holes with the holes below. Put those screws in. Okay, because we use the centering pin, it's perfectly aligned. It's positioned in a convenient location for accessing the controls, and it's going to fit neatly into the router table. Pretty easy, really sturdy. I don't think it's a terribly daunting task, and I wouldn't let it scare you off if you think it's too difficult to drill into these aluminium plates. It's really not. Just be careful and don't make a foolish mistake like putting your screw hole right next to another screw hole, and you'll be totally fine.